Hello, I'm Carl, and today on Carl Makes Things, our project is going to be a tutorial on how to paint Space Marines up as salamanders. I spent some time over the last few days kind of sussing out with the paints that I have a Salamander's color scheme that I'm pretty dang happy with. And it's fairly straightforward and simple to paint, and it's very impactful. When you get this guy on the tabletop, he definitely pops quite a bit, and it's quite simple to do. So let's get started on the process of how we go about painting this guy up. So to start off, the first color I'm going to put down is a little bit of flat green. So I'm going to mix this up for you guys so you can see what I'm going to be working with. So to get started, I'm going to take my Rosemary & Co. size 4 here. It's a fairly large brush with a little bit of our flat green mixed down. And I'm just going to start slapping down a coat here. It's important to note with these Kolinsky style brushes, if they are not particularly properly wetted, you can get a little bit of tip splitting in them. But once you kind of get them properly hydrated and you work their tip a little bit, they're going to start, kind of working themselves into a very fine tip. Alright, so that's our base coat of flat green down. And a little advice on when you're trying to paint with this particular paint. I found that I had to very, very well hydrate my paint to get it to kind of flow nicely. But this led it to having kind of a spotty finish. If we look over here on my hand here, you can see that there's some areas that are more dense than other areas. So when I went over this miniature, I was actually going over it multiple areas multiple times. And kind of layering up my paint. By doing this, what I've accomplished is actually create a very smooth finish that actually is quite even without having to go and glob paint on. So I haven't lost any of the nice little micro details, but gotten a nice smooth finish. All right, so the next color up is going to be Vallejo Color Light Green. Now let's get this mixed up, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to apply it. It's a little bit different than maybe what you're used to. So the mix we're going to be going for is a little bit of light green here. Take a drop of water, put it down there, and get this mixed up. And our application method today is actually going to be a makeup sponge for this layer. So I'm going to take a scissors and snip my makeup sponge in half, and then snip this in half. And we're going to be using this side of the makeup sponge, the kind of flat side that I've just cut. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers so you can see the process a little bit easier, but you can do this all by hand. The test miniature that I did was all by hand. We're going to load our makeup sponge up with a little bit of this green paint here, dabbing it out so it's nice and even. Any areas that aren't even, we're just even that out. That's looking pretty good. And let's get started on our next layer. So I've used this technique many, many times in most of my other videos, but there's a first time for everybody. So I'm going to go over the process here. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to use it kind of like a dry brush. In any areas that you feel like there should be a brighter kind of illumination, like the exterior of the legs or the tops of the shoulder pads or the tops of the head, we're just going to dab on some of the paint with our makeup sponge using many, many light iterative strokes, iterative taps. And whenever we're feeling like we're not depositing that much paint, we're going to go back to our tray, load up our sponge like I showed earlier, come back, just do a few test taps just to make sure that we're not loaded up with too much, and then we're going to come in and lightly layer on another layer. And this way we're going to really, really quickly work up a lot of really hard, nice contrast with our greens. And the sponge is going to naturally ride on the top of the surface and provide natural shading, which will be further enhanced with a wash. If you're a little rough with some areas, you might actually find that your sponge removes paint and creates darker areas where you don't want them to be. Those are quite easy to fix. We're just going to come back and lightly tap that area and kind of work up a new layer of paint there. It might take a few passes, but once you have the process down, it'll be quite easy for you to repair those areas. So sometimes you might see me use the side of my sponge like this to kind of smooth out areas. What I'm doing there is picking up paint that I've kind of over deposited and evening out the amount that I've placed on there. And that kind of helps me mitigate any kind of speckling and smooth out the overall transition that I'm getting. Alright, so that's our light green coat down, and you can see it's really brought out a lot of the detail and kind of contouring in the armor. But we can go a step further, and I'm going to use a color called Livery green. This is a really ultra kind of neon bright, high saturation green. And we're going to do almost the exact same thing as we did with the previous version, but we're going to do it in a little bit more of a fine and controlled way. Sponge blending in a lot of ways is very similar to dry brushing in that we want to make sure that we don't overly apply too much paint to our miniature when we're going over it. So with my livery green here, I really only want to go and get like the topmost bright highlights from kind of above. So I'm going to come in and very gently and very gradually work up my color from that kind of angle. Alright, so these nice hot green highlights are looking pretty nice, and I'm happy with how they've kind of turned out. So the next thing I'm going to go do is do all of the black on this miniature, because there's quite a bit. We look at the Salamanders paint scheme here. We have shoulder pads, backpack, joints, and weapon are all in black. And gold, whenever I paint gold, I undercoat that with black as well, because it gets a better result. So I am going to go do all of that. And the black I'm going to be using today is Model Color Black. It's a nice matte, kind of fine finished black. So the next step is to do some nice soft gray highlights on his backpack, shoulder pads, and weapons, and I'm going to use Basalt gray and a little bit more sponge blending to accomplish that. If you make a mistake here at this stage and you go a little bit too far with your Basalt gray, or really at any stage with sponge blending, you just come back in, throw down a little more base color here, and just wait a little bit until that dries and come back and give it another shot. It's a very forgiving technique if you're painting with solid colors, like I am doing with this black right now. Alright, so there's our sponge-blended highlights on, and I'm going to start working on the leather on this guy now. It's kind of just what I'm feeling like. And I'm going to start with a little heavy sienna to base coat my leather. It's a nice dark brown, but any dark brown will work. I'm just using this one because it's what I got. Alright, so while I'm waiting for my heavy sienna to dry, I'm going to grab a very bright metallic. I'm going to grab some silver, and we're going to put this down as our gunmetal. It bears mentioning that when I'm painting metallics in this video, I am using a fairly thick mix of metallic, and I'm being very, very gentle with my applications so they go on nice and smooth. And the reason I'm using silver is that I'm going to hit this all with a nice dark wash to kind of blend everything together at the end. And the silver is going to get washed down to more of a gunmetal. You're going to see how that looks. Don't worry about it. Alright, so I've gotten most of the metallic base coats down. I just want to finish up this leather before I move on to doing the eyes, and then we're going to go do that wash that I've been talking so much about. So to do the leather, I'm going to dry brush on just a little bit of this Cork brown from Vallejo Model Color. For very fine detailed areas like this, I'm just going to come in with a regular brush and just a little bit of dry paint and just scratch in some random detail in there. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little Stonewall gray in a few select areas. I'm going to come to my joints and kind of in the inside of them, I'm going to put in just a little bit of gray banding color. And if this looks kind of weird and odd to you, don't worry about it. We're going to come in with pure black wash and knock this down. And you're only going to see the gray kind of in the raised areas. Another place I'm going to put some Stonewall gray is in his eyes, in his lenses. They're going to be yellow, but yellow is quite difficult to paint on any kind of dark color with any kind of high level of saturation. All right, so the next step in this color scheme is to give this guy a series of washes. And the first wash we're going to do is kind of the overall wash for his green armor. And that wash uses two products, or actually three products. I'm going to be using some Army Painter QuickShade Dark Tone, Military Shader, and a little bit of Matte Medium and Water. So I'm going to do a 1:1:1 ratio of these three products, and then I'm going to add a little bit of water just to kind of get it flowing right. So 1, 2, 3 drops of Military Shader, 1, 2, 3 drops of Dark Tone, 1, 2, 3. Oh, there's 4 in there. That's okay. I'm going to take a little bit of water, just put a drop in there, maybe put a few drops over here in case we need to have a little bit more in our mix. I'm going to take the back of my brush and just start working that tone together. Do a little bit of test here to see if I got the color and kind of blend going on, and I'm liking that, what I'm getting over here. That is very kind of olive drab and very subtle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this guy kind of a glaze wash with all of this stuff over here. And I'm going to keep a good supply of water kicking around because I'm going to be managing my consistency of my wash during this entire process. So I'm going to be kind of tuning it on the miniature to kind of keep it from coffee staining. I'm going to take my wash and I'm just going to kind of slamp it down to start off with. I'm going to get into the joints here because those are also going to get a secondary wash of black later to kind of kick down that extra hot white that we've got in there. And I'm just going to do one section of this miniature at a time. So right now I'm doing his right leg here. Once I see that one section of his leg here is looking okay, I'm going to move on to the other section of his leg here. And we can actually see a much more dramatic effect. Any area that I feel like it's a little too intense or it's layered on too much, I'm just going to pull that back up once it is all down. Right in here on the back of his leg, I want that to be a nice bright highlight. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of water and just kind of make that wash go someplace else with that water, kind of push it away. It's important to note with this particular blend of wash with the military shader in there, which is kind of creating an olive drab, I'm going to avoid putting it on any of the kind of gold areas so as to not create any kind of color contrast conundrums. So while our armor wash is drying, I'm going to grab some pure dark tone and start layering this on all the areas that are pure black on the miniature. So I'm doing a very similar technique that I did with the rest of the armor, but this is just a much more kind of dense and heavy pigment load that I'm applying on. For the shoulder pads and the top of the backpack, I want to make sure that I have a nice even highlight of this gray. So I'm going to come in and just touch a lot of water into that area and flow all my dark tone just into the recesses and kind of keep it in a nice soft band around all the transition areas. I'm going to do the same with the top of the backpack here. You can see where it's getting a little splotchy, where that tone is being a little bit too inconsistent, little coffee stainy. I'm going to come in there and just touch that area up. Same over here, same over here. That's just going to clean up all those transitions. So the reason why I'm using pure strong tone while I'm doing this is that it's a lot easier to do this with a undiluted tone. But there's still water on my brush, so it's not an entirely thick mix. Because as I put more water on my brush to come in here and kind of manage the highlights, it's obviously getting more hydrated. Another place that I'm going to come in with my pure dark tone is my joints. I'm going to let the dark tone just kind of get settled in there. I might have to do a few passes on these. to kind of rework the dark areas. And if I get a little tone on any of the kind of rims, I'm just going to come in with a little bit of water and just wipe that right away. So the next tone that I'm going to use is a little bit of strong tone, and this is a kind of a brown tone. Alright, so our tone has fully dried, and this guy is looking more or less complete. I think he's looking pretty good. The only last two things that I need to do are the kind of name banner on his gun and his eyes. So I'm going to start with the name banner there. I'm going to grab some of my pure Cork brown, and I'm just going to throw a little bit of that down on there really quick. So while that's drying, I'm going to go and just clean up the Stonewall gray that I used for the eyes, because it's got a little bit of wash in there. I'm just going to come in here very delicately with my smallest brush. Just layer on some of that bright gray. I know I'm not worried about too much overspill on his brow or his kind of nose area, because I'm going to go and clean that up later with a little bit of highlighting. To do the yellow on the eyes, I'm going to use a little bit of kind of sun yellow from Game Color. So while that yellow on the eyes is fully drying, I'm going to come back here and just do another little light coat of my Cork brown on my little piece of paper. So to finish up the eyes, I'm going to take a little bit of strong tone, the brown wash that I used, and I'm just going to like layer it in just into the front of the eye there, to create a kind of darker spot. I don't want to give the entire lens a coat of this, just the tip of the front. So to finish up these lenses, I'm going to take a drop of pure white, try to keep my brush together here, and I'm going to come into my lens and just put just a little bit of it in the very back there. Just kind of tap in some white. There we go, just like that. Went a little bit too far on that left side, but it's actually looking pretty okay. It looks like a little bit like it's a hot highlight in there. I'm going to come in with just a little bit of more yellow. A little bit of yellow in there. Yeah, it's not looking too bad. Those are the lenses, pretty easy. And around the eyes, any areas that I feel like there's a little bit of a contamination, like on that kind of brow ridge, I'm going to take a little bit of my light green, and I'm just going to kind of clean that area up, just like that. So the very last thing I'm going to do is take some of my bone white. This is like an off cream colored white. I'm going to apply this to this little kind of nameplate here for his gun. And to finish up our little parchment, we're going to take a bit of our strong tone, pure strong tone, and just layer a little bit of that onto this area. Any overflow, we're just going to tidy up with a little bit of water. That'll add just a little bit of definition and shading to our little piece of parchment there. Should make it look a little bit more organic and natural. And this guy is pretty much all finished. The only last thing that I want to do for him is give him just a little bit of edge highlighting in a few kind of super ultra hot highlight spots. So anywhere that I've got green here, really bright green, I kind of want to put a little bit of an edge highlight on them. So I'm going to go do that real quick. And I'm going to be using just a little bit of Livery green to do that. For edge highlighting, I'm going to use a fairly dry paint and my smallest brush, so I'm applying the very minimal amount that I can. It's a very, very subtle effect, and I'm not going to do it everywhere. I'm just going to do it on the areas that I feel like need just a little bit more punch up. If you go a little too far with some of your edge highlights like here, we can always come in with a little bit of our kind of darker greens and just with very, very thin layers kind of knock that shade back just a touch. Just like that. And that'll clean up any little kind of mistakes that we make. These areas on his knee pads, I'm going to just mix a little bit of my greens together and kind of do more of a broad, subtle highlight in those areas. Less of an edge highlight and more of a kind of a gradual contour highlight. And I've just mixed my bright green with my livery green to get those kind of highlights. I'm also going to throw this mix just right in front of his head here, right on his kind of collar. That should create a really nice, interesting, broad kind of hot spot. I've switched to some cork brown here, and I'm just going to give some really kind of quick, rough edge highlights to all the leather to kind of make them pop a little bit more. For the last series of edge highlights on this miniature, I'm going to grab my Stonewall gray and I'm just going to pick in a few of the hot details along some of the weapons. Alright, and I think this guy is pretty much finished. The only thing I need to do is tidy up his base and do a bit of a quick paint job on there. I'm going to use some of the stuff that I have on my palette already. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of my heavy sienna as a base coat. So I have my heavy sienna down on this base, but I've got a few rocks on here that I want to pull out some detail on. I'm just going to kind of come in with my Stonewall gray and just touch on a little bit of brightness into these rocks. So that's our Stonewall gray down on those rocks. The next thing I'm going to do is wash this base to kind of give it a little bit more detail and shading. And I'm going to use two products for that. This is generally what I use for bases. I'm going to use some brown wash from Vallejo Model Color and some black wash. I put 3 or 4 drops of my brown wash in here, and I'm just going to come in and just gradually add black to it until it's a little bit dark brown, like an espresso. And for the rocks, I'm going to take the pure black wash and I'm just going to put that down on them. So I'm going to get my big dry brush here, and I'm going to do just a quick cork brown dry brushing on my base. There we go. That's a pretty fast and dirty base, but I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to take a little bit of my bone on my dry brush, work it in with my cork brown on my desktop here. I'm just going to lightly brush that on all the top kind of areas, create an even hotter highlight. The last thing I'm going to do for this base is I'm going to just tidy up the actual rim of the base with a little bit of black paint here. And when that last detail finished, I'm going to call this guy done. I have to say I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. I'll throw the turntables up so we can look at him in detail while I go through the regular end of the video spiel. I want to thank you guys for watching. I make videos to share my love of miniatures painting with the community at large, and so I hope you enjoyed watching. If you like what I do and want to support my channel, the best thing you can do is share my videos with other hobbyists and subscribe to the channel. As always, I appreciate comments on the video, and any questions that you have, I will try to answer in the comments. And if you're looking for a fun and welcoming place to share your work and just chat about painting in general, I've got a Discord you can check out. Everyone's welcome. It's a friendly, fun place. Me and my buddies kind of hang out there and post work in progresses of all of our stuff. So I posted a lot of the work in progresses of the Space Marines that I worked on, including the plasma guy over there on my Discord. You can check that out anytime you like. And that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, this is Carl signing out.